When you're experiencing intense symptoms and yet when you go to your doctor and they say it's just anxiety, a common question that might pop up in your head is, okay, well, how do I cure this? How do I make this go away? And just based on the thumbnail in this video, you might be concerned. You might be saying, well, I can't cure this, so that means this is always something I'm gonna have to deal with for the rest of my life. Is that actually true? Well, in this video, I'm gonna share with you this concept around curing your anxiety, and really just because you can't cure the anxiety doesn't mean that you have to live with these symptoms for the rest of your life. So with that said, let's get it started. So before we get started in this video, I'm not really going to be breaking down the steps to overcoming your symptoms. If you really want to know, there's some free resources down below. We just released a desensitization blueprint, which is in order to overcome your symptoms, you have to learn what we call desensitize your nervous system. So there's a blueprint as well that really breaks down how that works. All the information is down below. There's even success stories and recovery stories to help inspire you on your journey. But in this video, I'm really going to be breaking down this concept of curing anxiety, because a huge part of overcoming your anxiety symptoms is really understanding what's happening. And before we even get into the conversation of making these symptoms go away, we have to get to the point of, okay, let's fundamentally first understand what's even happening. Let's just take a step back and see what's going on. How do you define anxiety? What is anxiety? Because depending on who you ask, everyone has their own opinions of anxiety. They have their own definitions of anxiety. And then when you hear, well, anxiety can't be cured, then naturally you start fearing it and you're saying, well, this is something I'm always gonna have to deal with for the rest of my life, including the symptoms. I would look at anxiety in two different ways, right? There's anxiety as an emotion, just like sadness, just like happiness, just like anger. You know, there's feelings of anxiety and there's a purpose for these emotions, right? There's a purpose for feeling this way. And anxiety's main focus is to protect you. It's to keep you alive. So anytime you're in a situation that might be considered dangerous, you start experiencing these emotions of anxiety. And the emotion of anxiety isn't a very pleasurable experience. So it's made in a way where you run away from it. You don't want to experience it. Now that's one type of anxiety. Now another type of anxiety is that they start experiencing debilitating symptoms because of their anxiety. They're getting intrusive thoughts. They're getting feelings of unreality, the depersonalization, derealization. They're getting panic attacks. They're getting heart palpitations. They're getting dizziness. They're getting the fainting feeling. They're getting, the excessive sweating, all these different symptoms. And that's also classified as anxiety. Well, what happens with that type of anxiety is that it sort of turns into what we call a disorder. Again, always make sure you get everything ruled out by your doctor. Don't start throwing these words around unless you've actually gone to a doctor, gotten everything ruled out. But what essentially happens is that you have this fight or flight mechanism that's designed to protect you when you start experiencing so much stressors that you hit a threshold. Well, what happens is that your nervous system says there's clearly a threat, there's something that's stressing Shaan out. So we're gonna be on high alert now. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna desensitize, because we wanna be very specific and we wanna be very careful and very aware for the slightest change, because we wanna protect Shaan and we wanna make sure there's no danger. So what happens is that when you're experiencing these symptoms are a consequence of your nervous system becoming very sensitive. Another word that a lot of people use is your nervous system is hyperstimulated. And because it's hyperstimulated, well, now you're starting experiencing these symptoms. But what a lot of people do is that they end up thinking that it's the symptom that's the problem. It's the heart palpitations, it's the dizziness, it's the brain fog. And then they go to their doctors and the doctors say, your organs are functioning totally fine. There's nothing wrong. I don't know what's going on. So that's a second type of anxiety here, right? So we have two different types of anxiety. So when we're saying, well, can anxiety be cured? Well, which anxiety are we talking about? And a huge problem in this alone is just definition. How do you define it, right? Because what happens is that you might be noticing that you go to people and you'll be like, how do I cure anxiety? Well, they're gonna look at you and they say, how can you cure it? You can't cure that. Can you cure sadness? Can you cure happiness? Can you cure anger? You can't cure it, Like, that's a symptom that you're always going to experience. It's not always, but it has its place, and it'll pop up when it's necessary. But what happens is, if you're an anxiety sufferer who can't drive because you're experiencing intense panic attacks, if you're getting intense physical symptoms that's preventing you from enjoying your job, or you're getting intense derealization, depersonalization, and you feel like you've messed up your brain chemicals, well, when somebody gives you that answer, the natural response is, well, okay, if I can't get it cured, well, then that means that I always have to deal with these symptoms. Anxiety isn't a disease. Like we talked about, anxiety is an emotion. It's a stress response designed to protect you. The problem isn't the anxiety. The problem is that it's turned into this big monster that keeps showing up in situations where it's inappropriate. This is why even the medical community, they don't say the word anxiety disease, they say anxiety disorder, right? Because it's showing up in situations where there is no threat. So what's happened is that your nervous system has gotten a little bit disoriented. It doesn't know what's a threat now. And so what it does is that it responds to everything as a threat. Now, here's a little secret I want to give you, right? A lot of people think that it's experiencing the anxiety in inappropriate situation that's the disorder. Well, the actual disorder is the response to the anxiety. So when you're experiencing anxiety in situations where there's no threat, but then you still react like there's a threat, right? Oh no, I'm having digestive issues. What if this happens? What if that happens? Oh, I have heart palpitations. What if this happens? Oh, I'm having panic attacks. Oh my God, what if I do lose control? See, you're reacting in a way where there is an actual threat. So what that does is that reinforces the cycle. So the biggest focus really is on what we call desensitizing your nervous system and retraining your nervous system, showing it it's no threat, that the only threat that you were experiencing were the symptoms in itself, and the symptoms were benign. There was nothing wrong because, again, you got everything ruled out. Well, then naturally your nervous system desensitizes because there is no threat. So what happens is that as it desensitizes, your symptoms start going away. And this is how recovery looks. This is how, when we're guiding people through the recovery journey, this is all we're focusing on. You know, so many people come in with so many different symptoms, and what we do is we show them the exact same principles, the exact same solution. And what happens, ironically, is that the symptoms end up going away because it was never the symptoms that mattered. It was the fact that it was anxiety. Right? It's like getting the flu. It's not the symptoms that this flu produces that you have to worry about. As long as you take care of the flu in itself, all the symptoms go away on its own. Anxiety recovery is the exact same way. So recognize this idea of anxiety being a cure where you're coming from the premise of anxiety being a disease. And anxiety is not a disease, right? There's anxiety that's a healthy emotion, and people that recover from anxiety will also still experience situations where there is a little bit of heightened anxiety, but that's not a problem. That's okay. People that never experienced debilitating anxiety have also experienced that as well. But the second part, where you're experiencing these symptoms that are very uncomfortable, and you're getting anxiety in situations where it's not appropriate, and the anxiety symptoms are just getting so overwhelming where you're losing a lot of weight, that you can overcome. But again, it was never a disease because there was nothing actually wrong with you. The only thing is that your nervous system got disoriented, and now it's assuming everything is a threat. Now, the last thing I want to mention is a lot of people will ask, well, what made my nervous system disoriented? Why did my nervous system assuming everything is a threat? Well, what happens is a lot of people fall into the cycle from a panic attack. Not everybody, but a good amount of people typically fall in from a panic attack. And when you have a panic attack, it's almost like a response your body has where it says, okay, there's a threat, fight or flight mode on right now, right? And so what you'll find is, even though you have a panic attack, there is no threat, there's no tiger, well, then the symptoms become the tiger in itself. But what happens is when you're experiencing that panic attack, your nervous system essentially desensitizes right away. So that's what happened. When your nervous system gets sensitized, it's going to assume everything is a threat. And that's a survival adaptation. But people don't know that, right? They're like, oh, well, something's seriously wrong with me. Why am I experiencing symptoms where there is no threat? There's nothing wrong except how I'm feeling. And so the biggest thing is focusing on overcoming these symptoms by learning to desensitize your nervous system. I hope it makes you realize that don't look at anxiety and what you're going through as some sort of disease or something like that, because what that will also do is that will mess with your psychology a bit. That'll mess with your mindset because you'll start thinking you're broken. You'll start thinking that there's something inherently wrong with you. And I know anxiety is really good at making you feel that way. And so when you look at anxiety as a disease or something that's not curable, well then that reinforces that. But the truth is that there's no cure because it's not a disease. It's really just a disorder. And once you learn to retrain your nervous system and show it how to respond, and you have the education behind how anxiety works, well then you'll never fall back into the cycle and this will never become a problem again. But I've always also known that the best way for people to overcome this is by having someone guide them through the recovery journey. And look, that doesn't have to be me, but I would definitely say somebody that you know, who you feel like you can trust, guiding you through the journey, because anxiety recovery, it's a game of patience. And when you're not sure what's going on, it's really hard to know what's the North Star, what's the right direction, especially when the symptoms hit you really hard. You'll notice it's very disorienting, right? And so what I always say is find somebody, ideally in my opinion, someone who's gone through this, who's overcome it, that can guide you through the process. So if you want that to be me and my team, you can hit the link down below and you can apply for mentorship. Like I say, even if you want to just watch some recovery stories from people in the mentorship to see, well, how does the recovery process look like? That will help you a lot on its own. You can check that out before deciding to apply. If you really want to get the blueprint to really get a good idea first before you apply, that's totally cool too. So there's all these different resources down below for you to succeed. So there's really no excuse not to recover here. Okay? So with that said, I'll see you in the next video.